and Aral. I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you all something I'm passionate about and something I find really interesting, even if at the sort of first glance, it can come off as a bit of a kind of an interesting topic. But I think hopefully what we can do today is maybe spark some ideas, some possibilities, and maybe potentially lead to some new connections and new opportunities for you all as entrepreneurs and creative people in Philadelphia, in and around Philadelphia. So first, just some logistics. What I'll be doing is going through a couple kind of slides and going over some different things. And then what I'll do is I'll pause at the end of each section and check in to see if there's any questions. So feel free to put some questions in chat and or kind of save your questions till I pause and see what's checked back in. I have my email address at the end of the presentation, so if anybody wants to follow up and ask questions or learn more, check that out at the end. All right, so let me share my presentation. All right. So this is Manufacturing 101. This presentation is being presented by DVIRC, and I'll explain a bit more who they are in just a second. And it's being supported by a larger grant that I also will share a little bit more about. So first of all, why here, why now? So the Manufacturing Access Project has been going on for a few years now. The goal of this project is to bring together what we call a regional industrial ecosystem. And so this kind of circle diagram represents all these different stakeholders that exist in the region. And our goal is to find ways to get these different players and different stakeholders to work together. And to be a little more specific, some of the things that we've learned in the past few years is that we need to develop understanding of existing ecosystem stakeholders and their barriers. We need to develop new strategies to build ecosystem connections. And we're finding different ways to kind of do that. And more specifically, kind of why we're here today is because we find that there's an opportunity to build bridges between entrepreneurs and SMMs. And SMMs, by the way, stands for small and medium-sized manufacturers. We have found through our work that there's barriers to these bridges between entrepreneurs and manufacturers. We find pretty typically that there's misunderstandings. For example, entrepreneurs aren't aware of manufacturing capabilities in the region, and manufacturers themselves aren't aware of the demand for production in the region. And this is ultimately kind of a byproduct of the fact that information is being siloed, making it difficult for product developers to learn about cost-saving strategies, and for SMMs, they're missing out on new market opportunities. And so ultimately, part of the motivation to connect to Venture Cafe and connect entrepreneurs and creative people is to help demystify manufacturing. And so what we're going to do today is kind of walk you through some of the jargon that exists around the world of design and manufacturing. We'll talk a bit about what it means to define a supply chain. And then lastly, I'll share with you some resources that are available online and in person that can help you get started if you are a product developer looking for some connections and some opportunities. So first, understanding design and manufacturing. Just to start out at a very high level, just to kind of get us all on the same page, I think it's helpful just to kind of briefly look at these kind of vague definitions, and I'll get more specific as we go. But ultimately, just to point out, like manufacturing, there's no one specific kind of way of understanding manufacturing. It's important to understand that it really is just about using technology and labor to transform raw and recycled materials into finished goods. And I realize that's very vague, but again, I think it's important to kind of start there. And so we can break that down a bit further. If manufacturing really is about using technology and labor to make stuff, we can start to understand a bit more about, well, what does that mean in more specific details? So for one, we can understand technology to be one of two different things. It could be considered specialized technology, which means that it's a dedicated piece of equipment for a specific part. And so, for example, like this mold for shoe soles on the right, that tool is designed to make shoe soles. And basically for the life of that tool, that's what it does. Yes, you could melt this down and make a different tool out of it, but ultimately you design and make this a specific piece of equipment, specific piece of technology, just to make this part. At the other end of the spectrum, there's what we call flexible technology, and that's equipment that can be used to make a variety of parts or finished products. And so, for example, a table saw or a 3D printer, as you see here, that piece of technology can make kind of anything and everything if it's in the hands of an expert, in the hands of somebody creative and knows how to use it. And so technology, manufacturing technology in today's world, in 2020, we have what's called legacy or traditional technology, and that's technology that's been around for a very long time. So for example, die cutting, injection molding, cutting and sewing, metal stamping, like these are all considered traditional manufacturing technologies. And then again, on the other end of the spectrum, we have what's called advanced manufacturing technologies. And this is typically what we consider kind of innovative and cutting edge contemporary technology. So if anybody's ever heard the phrase Industry 4.0 or additive manufacturing or subtractive manufacturing, this fits under the kind of topic of AMT. Industry 4.0, again, just as a kind of quick synopsis, includes lots of different things. It includes robotics, it includes automation, it includes additive and subtractive manufacturing. It also includes more basic things like security, cybersecurity, cloud data, etc. Additive manufacturing is basically the process of building objects using layer by layer stacking of material. And in today's world, you might be most familiar with 3D printing plastics, but we actually have the ability today to 3D print ceramics, concrete, metal, as well as lots of different plastics. And we even now have the ability to 3D print bio-based materials. Subtractive manufacturing is the process of using, starting with a larger block of material or a sheet good, a large piece of flat material, and then using digitally controlled tools to cut it. Or one of the most kind of newest ways of doing subtractive manufacturing is using automated robotic arms and attaching different types of cutting tools to cut away extra material. So technology has to be paired with labor in order to make stuff. And so again, in the world of manufacturing, we have kind of two kinds of labor. We've got unskilled labor, which typically means, somebody is trained to do one step of the production process, and skilled labor, which means that somebody's more able to do multiple steps of the production process and could potentially have a hand in also figuring out how to make something, not just being told kind of what to do. And so, again, if you're a product developer and you're starting to understand a little bit about manufacturing, there's chances are you've heard a bunch of different catchphrases. Like, we tend to think about manufacturing as just mass production. There's kind of new strategies about when you're starting out a business, you might pursue small batch manufacturing. Some of you might have heard about mass customization or artisanal production as well. So these terms, while we would ideally have a perfect definition that means the same thing to everybody, these terms also are a little bit vague. And so it's important to kind of think about, again, how we might pair technology and labor to achieve something. So if for example, you're looking for lots and lots of identical parts, say in the 10,000, 100,000 unit range, you really are looking at a strategy called mass production. If you're maybe starting out and you're looking for maybe just one-off or a small batch or maybe 10 of something, you might actually be using more of an artisanal production strategy. On the other end, we can talk about design jargon. And again, this is something we find more and more is that lots of entrepreneurs don't actually come out of an industrial design or product design background. We find scientists, engineers, people who are inspired just kind of on a daily life to start solving problems. And so a lot of the jargon that's typically limited and sort of segmented to the product design kind of profession needs to also be understood in order to navigate the world of manufacturing. And so for example, iteration is a key word when talking to manufacturer. Like if you're communicating with them and you want them to know kind of where you are in the product development process, the word iteration tells them that you're kind of early in the design process. Prototyping is maybe a more familiar phrase, but it's also important to understand that there's different types of prototypes. You can have what's called a looks like prototype, which is more about just communicating the right shape, size, material. You can have a works like prototype, which is more about illustrating the functionality, even if it doesn't look exactly right. In some industries like textiles and soft goods, they actually use the phrase sample instead of prototype. And then lastly, another type of prototype you might be working on is a proof of concept. And this is ultimately an early prototype that has some, but not all the details developed. Those of you who might be familiar with the lean startup might have heard the phrase minimal viable product. And that's a phrase that's gained a lot of traction in the entrepreneurial world, especially in the past kind of decade. And it's a phrase that is actually new to the world of manufacturing. And so this is something we'll talk about deeper in just a second, but ultimately a minimal viable product is a type of prototype that we can reference. Where design and manufacturing meet typically is when we start to talk about who we might want to build a relationship with to actually get our products made. So contract manufacturing is simply the idea that you're going to hire a company to produce your product for you as compared to establishing your own in-house production capabilities. And there's two different kind of buckets of contract manufacturers. One is original equipment manufacturer, and one is what we call original design manufacturer. And the big difference here is that an ODM you can actually hire to actually take on the design, engineering, and the production of your design. Whereas an OEM manufacturer, they're really just going to make your product, which means you have to come to them with a design and engineering specifications already figured out. So both of these strategies have kind of pros and cons. In the OEM kind of way, if you already are an engineer, already have a product design background, this might save you some time and money to more find an OEM manufacturer. Whereas if you're more of, if you don't have the engineering background or design background, the nice thing about an ODM is, again, they can kind of do everything under one roof. So I'll pause there. I realize I'm kind of throwing a lot at you very quickly. So I just want to pause to see if there's any questions about any of these kind of ideas or concepts, this jargon. Okay, I'll take silence to mean that everything's good. All right, so let me share the screen and move on to the next section. All right, so part two, defining a supply chain. So a supply chain includes the flow of all information, products, materials, and funds between different stages of creating and selling a product to the end user. So again, that's a very high level definition. In essence, the supply chain are all the businesses that have to kind of be part of the process, going from, that can include everything from people making raw materials to processing them into finished goods to actually the wholesaler and the retailer at the end. So it's important to understand that your supply chain depends on where you are in your product development process. So for example, if you're just making a prototype, that still requires building a supply chain. You still have to think about, okay, what materials go into the prototype, who has the capability to make one, and then vice versa. If maybe you already have a prototype and you've done early sales in small quantities, but you want to scale up, you have to build another comparable supply chain that could handle those larger quantities. So you have to start by thinking about, where am I in my development process? And so what we suggest, and this is something we've developed kind of through lots of conversations with different entrepreneurs, is even if you're not quite sure exactly, what manufacturing technique you want or what materials you want, if you can spend some time defining these next elements in some way, you can actually find ways to kind of get connections faster. And so if you can define these elements, and I'll talk about them in more depth, then again, you can like navigate this process. So scale, size, materials, process and technology, and location. So first, scale, another kind of phrase you might use is quantity. This kind of basically means like the number of units you're looking to have made. And just like before with the phrase like mass production and small batch, like these terms don't mean something specific. So mass production for one type of manufacturer might be 10,000 units, but for another type of manufacturing, you might need to be talking about 50,000 units before you kind of meet the standards of that specific factory, that method. And so these are just very kind of understood terms in the world of design and manufacturing. And so again, like as your company grows, as you pursue kind of larger sales, you might start out, with just custom or samples or one-offs, and then as your quantity grows, you'll move through these different strategies. So knowing what quantity you want is important. Not all manufacturers have the capability to say, make just one, and vice versa, not all companies have the capabilities of making 10,000. So if you know how many you want, you can find that best pair, that best fit. Next, if you can define the size, so this is probably the most easiest thing for people to understand, is your object at a very small scale, say a nanoscale, or at the size of a building at an architectural scale? Once again, like there's no predefined kind of standard definition across industry. Manufacturers tend to kind of specialize in one size. So companies that do manufacturing on sort of a tabletop or handheld size, like that's what they do best. And so trying to get something made, say on an architectural scale by a company that specializes in handheld small objects is not a good fit. And they're likely to either not respond to your not respond to your kind of inquiry, or you might find an extremely high price because that's not their expertise. And so it's not best for them to like, kind of quote you in a positive way. Next, so understanding materials, and typically we can kind of put materials into kind of 3 different categories. The first being, is it an off-the-shelf material, meaning is it readily available to anyone? If you can find it online, if you can find it in a store, you can find it at a kind of in a warehouse kind of distribution supplier, then that's considered what we call an off-the-shelf material. Typically, off-the-shelf materials are cheaper than the other 2, which are unique and hard to find and limited accessibility. In some industries, there are materials that are only made by one supplier. And so if they're hard to find, you might not be able to buy it off the shelf. You actually have to order it directly from the supplier. And then the third type of material is what we call customized or made to order. And so this might be a kind of a hybrid of the 2 where let's say you start out with an off-the-shelf material that's a color that is kind of standard, but your brand, you might be interested in a kind of customized version of that, where again, you have to build a relationship directly with the manufacturer of that material. Next, if you can define process and technology, and again, even just understanding that you might be looking for a kind of made by hand process or using a mechanized technology. And this is important to note because if you're using a mechanized technology, you're likely to need kind of one of 2 things, either the development of a custom tool like that shoe sole mold that we saw at the beginning, or the creation of a digital file that can control a piece of CNC technology. And CNC stands for computer numeric control. And so again, it's okay if you don't know specifically the exact plastic or the exact manufacturing technology. Just having clarity on what you need in terms of making what you want to make can help you get faster, get through the supply chain search faster. And then the last element is, thinking about where you want to have your parts or your product made. Do you want to focus on regional capabilities? It's another way of saying kind of made locally. Do you want to go with national suppliers, or are you interested in global? And ultimately, in some cases, again, like there might be, if you're in a specific industry with very kind of specific standards, you might find that there's only a few manufacturers in the whole world that can make a part or work with certain materials. In that case, you have a limited sort of ability to define the location. But in other cases, such as with like injection molded plastics, those capabilities exist all around the world and in our own region. And so you do actually have control over where you're picking. And so any clarity you can build around these kind of 5 elements, it makes your search smaller. And that's the thing that we find, at least initially with entrepreneurs, like just having a sense of like shortening the search from just generically searching manufacturing to searching more specifics like manufacturer that works at, at a run size of 1,000 units or works with a kind of specific material or a generic material. This does narrow down the search and therefore makes your supply chain kind of building process much smoother. It is important to know that your supply chain will likely change. And so, for example, just a kind of generic, easy to understand kind of manufacturing process or making a product. Let's say we want to design and make shoes and we need to cut leather. So your supply chain might actually start with finding somebody that can cut leather by hand. And from there, you might start to scale up. And now you have to find a company that can use die cutting to stamp leather to kind of speed up the process. And then from there, again, maybe you have more success and you want to get more into like customized parts and pieces, in which case you might scale up and start to use what's called a CNC drag knife, which is basically taking the knife, similar kind of tool like you would use by hand, and instead attaching it to a CNC controlled machine that cuts out custom parts. And then again, you might scale up one more time. And again, we see speed coming in and making the manufacturing process faster. And in this case, we can use CNC die cutting, which is, again, making a dedicated tool, but then using a robotic process to move that die around and cut out parts. And this same kind of scaling process exists, again, across the board, across all types of manufacturing techniques and processes. And so example number 2, let's imagine you're developing a simple electronic kind of product, an Internet of Things type product. So again, you might start out with a supply chain that utilizes 3D printing to develop the parts and pieces. And from there, you might go into low run injection molding, where you can actually kind of buy this basic equipment yourself or work with companies that can then make temporary tooling for low runs. You can then go to an online platform, which allows you to scale up your manufacturing again. And then lastly, you might go to a more of a kind of dedicated injection molding factory that can make tens, if not hundreds of thousands of parts very, very quickly. And so each of these stages would require a new supply chain. We get the question a lot, like, is it ever possible to scale your supply chain? And, for example, go from 3 units to 1,000 or go from off-the-shelf materials to customized. And the answer is it depends on the manufacturers. Some manufacturers do actually have the capabilities to work at a very small run as well as a large run. And so if that's important to you, that you'd rather work with one manufacturer throughout multiple stages of your growth, that's just a kind of question and to ask manufacturers and to kind of, as you build that relationship, understand at what point you might have to kind of outgrow your supply chain, outgrow your relationships and move on. A question we also get a lot from entrepreneurs is, can I do it alone? Can I own my own production? And yes, it can be done. Like both, we have found entrepreneurs that take on building their own kind of internal manufacturing facilities, and or do hybrids where maybe they couldn't find a local manufacturer that had the capabilities to do something they wanted. And so they invested in technology for that part, but then relied on others to do other parts of the production. It's important to know that ultimately, if you want to go it alone and build a facility, ultimately it means, it kind of opens up other parts of any business development. You have to think about buying production technology, managing materials, overseeing workforce, and managing space. So I wouldn't say rule it out, but again, it kind of is up to you as an entrepreneur to think about what part of the process do you want to own versus do you want to kind of build relationships around. All right, so once again, I'll stop there and see, again, if there's any questions that are popping up. Okay. Oh,
excuse me, I have a question.
Yep.
Where can I find those manufacturers who could make a 3-5 prototype?
So that's actually the next section I'm going to get into. We'll share a little bit of how to find them. So that's a good question for the next section.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So let's move on, and we could talk about what resources currently exist and what DVIRC is trying to help do as well. All right, so getting started. So there's a lot of different kind of ways you can go about doing this. And we know we know a lot of entrepreneurs get started in lots of different starting places. And so to help kind of navigate that process, we've put together some resources that you can reference, and hopefully this can again get you moving into this world of manufacturing. So first, makerspaces. So makerspaces are places like NextFab, or if you're connected to a university, a lot of the major universities around the city have makerspaces. And makerspaces are good for prototyping, for gaining insights about scaling and finding experts. So for example, in Philadelphia, we've got NextFab, we've got Philadelphia Woodworking, Clay Studio, Public Workshop, 576. All these places are either a combination of, like 576, for example, is a group of people kind of working independently, but as a collective, whereas NextFab they offer membership to access technology, and they actually offer prototyping services. So all these different maker spaces, they're filled with lots of experts in different ways of making things. They're filled with experts who have lots of different backgrounds, from running equipment to manufacturing to engineering and design. And so connecting to these spaces allows you to potentially gain some insights into, how to make things and where to get things made. And they're likely to give you insights into, questions that you might need to help answer in order to help build relationships with manufacturers. Next, an important resource for you to know about, if you're not familiar, is the Ben Franklin Technology Partners. And they actually have a grant process which provides a matching fund of up to $5,000 for regional companies that wish to utilize prototyping and design facilities and services. And so if you're interested in learning more about this program, you can go to the link you see here, and you can contact Mark Trebold. And the FabNet network consists of roughly 15 different companies that all offer different types of prototyping, from soft goods to working in plastics, to working in metals, to even the development of different electronic components related to, say, smart products. And Ben Franklin Technology Partners, again, is a great resource for all sorts of kind of entrepreneurial support. And so it's worth looking into them for other things too, beyond just the FabNet program. Online databases are really good, again, for finding contract manufacturers, getting insights about scaling, and finding experts. And so here's a list of some of the different types of supply databases that are out there. This is not at the end all be all list, but these are the kind of most robust and most typically kind of referenced. Some of these databases are international. Some of them only operate with the United States. So again, this is where you can think about where you might want to focus your list, or sorry, focus your search versus kind of looking wherever you want to go. Each of these databases allows you to search in several different ways. So you can narrow down by state, region, country. You can narrow down by technology, material, etc. I have to warn you, some of these sites aren't very well graphically designed and are a little bit sort of hard to look at, but they are very, very useful. Sites like Maker's Row also has a platform for selling products. So if you're an entrepreneur and you develop a product and you build relationships with manufacturers through Maker's Row, you can also get a storefront to sell your products as well. Online distributed manufacturing is a new kind of a new development, I would say, over the past 5 years or so. And using online distributed manufacturing is good for prototyping and small runs, as well as getting insights about manufacturing processes. So these are five examples. Again, this isn't the end all be all list. And some of these offer different types of services. So for example, Xometry allows you to upload a file that can be 3D printed. It can be made out of sheet metal. It can be made out of CNCing metal, other metals like aluminum, steel, etc. Whereas Shapeways is more focused just on 3D printing, but they offer 3D printing of plastics, of ceramics, as well as of precious metals. And with these sites, it's the goal with these sites is that because we have Industry 4.0, we have all this kind of interconnectivity. Anybody that can create a 3D file or even a 2D file in the case of Xometry and laser cutting, you can upload a file and within hours or kind of a day, you can actually get a quote for a part back. And all of these sites allow you to make just one of something, and then they kind of scale up from there. Xometry is the most, I think, robust out of these examples. And they actually, again, kind of acknowledging the scaling of supply chains, they offer different services for different scales of parts. And if you're looking for more than just, say, prototyping, they actually can offer direct services to help you understand or sort of build relationships with other manufacturers. I also recommend books. I know in sort of today's world, books might be overlooked, but these 3 books are ones I recommend. I teach industrial design and product design and teach a lot of students about making and manufacturing. And these books are ones I reference and share with students a lot. These books are specifically designed to kind of take complex ideas that we understand in manufacturing and make them much easier to understand. And so if you're a little hesitant to say, start reaching out to manufacturers before knowing a little bit more about a specific technique that you think you might want to use, these resources are very good and help you, again, kind of gain just a little bit more knowledge to make it easier to engage in conversation. Online glossaries are good for gaining insights about manufacturing processes, as well as understanding sector-specific requirements. So if you are, let's say, developing a product that's going to be in the world of healthcare, there are lots of industry requirements and industry-specific codes and standards that have to be met. And so these examples, these different glossaries help you understand like what those standards are. And that gives you, again, more information to then go more accurately find a manufacturer with some specific capabilities and have certain standards that could be important to the industry that you're working in. Software. So Dragon Innovation is an example of software that allows you to manage what's called a bill of materials. So let's say your product has 10 different parts coming from 10 different suppliers. Dragon Innovation kind of makes it easy to track where those different parts are coming from. It helps you understand the relationships between those companies. And also there's multiple levels of services that you could take advantage of. You can actually hire them to help you find a manufacturer. And they also offer online education. So if you find you're at a point in your product development where you need to learn more about design for manufacturing, which is the process of, say, going from a rough prototype to something that can be easily manufactured at scale, Dragon Innovation kind of offers these different services and insights that can help that process become more easily understood. Word of mouth is also an important resource. So a lot of times we hear in the entrepreneurial world, if one company had a really good relationship with, say, an injection molding company, they'll share that information and help others find that company as well. And so through conversations like at Venture Cafe, or if you're a member of an incubator or accelerator, asking your other kind of entrepreneurs who they work with and who they found successes with is a good strategy and can actually lead to really fast results. And so I know sometimes there's a tendency to try to keep your information to yourself, or to try to, in fear of potentially losing a connection. But ultimately we find actually the truth is more sharing of information tends to lead to better outcomes for everybody. And then lastly, to share a little bit about what DVIRC is doing and we're hoping to potentially help you as entrepreneurs. So Delaware Valley Industrial Resource Center is part of a statewide initiative that's been around for roughly 30 years. And so in Philadelphia, we've got DVIRC, and then I think there's 5 offices total across the country. So DVIRC has built up relationships with over 5,000 small and medium-sized manufacturers in the area. And so part of what we're trying to do is find ways of like opening up this network. Like if there's 5,000 manufacturers in the region, how can we better connect you as entrepreneurs and creative individuals to these manufacturers in the region? And so we're trying to develop a new strategy, and this strategy basically includes working with myself. And you can, if you're looking for a manufacturer, you can contact me, and we will build together we'll build a manufacturing request, and then together we work with DVIRC to then generate recommendations for manufacturers. This process is completely free. It's really just about building relationships and building connections within the regional ecosystem. And so part of what we hope to be doing is, again, kind of removing some of the barriers and the breaking down the silos that we know exist between the entrepreneurial world and the manufacturing world. So ultimately, what I'd like to do now is see if there's any questions from you all. I think there's, again, I realize I just threw a lot at you, and I'm happy to answer any questions. If you have specific if anybody in the audience is actually kind of trying to find a manufacturer or has specific barriers or challenges they've faced, I'd be happy to kind of use any examples that you have to maybe answer other questions in the audience as well.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you for this and making it at a decent hour. I had such a busy day. I was so happy it was at 7 o'clock and we could get a chance to listen to this. What software do you need to take to a manufacturer? Do you need CAD drawings, industrial drawings? What do you need?
That's a very good question. So the answer is it depends on the manufacturer. So there are some companies that can work with just a 2-dimensional drawing. And so even if you make a rough sketch with dimensions drawn by hand, there are companies that can start to work with you. If you want to use one of those distributed manufacturing platforms like Xometry or Shopify, that does require uploading a 3D CAD file. And so some of those platforms offer services to help you make that file. But then also locally, there's lots of local talent that can work with you to help make those files. So I always recommend, like, if you have a manufacturer that you found online, the best strategy is to talk to them directly, because they'll tell you exactly the best way to communicate with them, whether it's through a 2D file or if it has to be more sophisticated, like or if it has to be more sophisticated, like a 3D CAD file.
Thank you.
Yeah, unfortunately, it would be nice if there was a standard, but it really comes down to the individual manufacturer.
Oh, Andrew?
Mm-hmm.
I work with startups all the time on a professional basis. Can you dive deeper into the pros and cons of a startup actually producing a product or contracting their product out? Because that's inevitably a question I get.
Yeah, so so I think it depends on the expertise of the team. So, for example, if in today's world, like, we do have, people that have the capabilities of buying small scale 3D printing equipment and running it themselves, and not everybody has that capability. So I would say if the team already has some insights into what it takes to make it, then it can actually be valuable to kind of build your own internal production. Granted, it's a give and take, like the cost of the equipment. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs sort of have to ask themselves, like, do you want to be sitting in front of that machine, keeping it going? Do you want to hire somebody to keep it going? Is that really a cost benefit to, like, buy it and run it yourself versus building a relationship with a contract manufacturer? I think there's no right or wrong. I think it just kind of really comes down to, like, what is the value of you doing it yourself versus you building a relationship with somebody who maybe has a lengthy history of doing that. These different platforms are also making it easier all the time to outsource and get the results that you want. And I think more and more we're seeing people depending on these platforms for, let's say, the first round of manufacturing, because they make it easy to make small runs. But as you grow, the cost benefit starts to shrink, and it makes more sense to build relationships with contract manufacturers. So I think I think a lot of times we see entrepreneurs who think it's cheaper to do it themselves. And I think most often it's because they don't value their time correctly. They say to themselves, well, I can stay up all night making 100 parts. And then unfortunately, they don't always calculate the sort of cost of them doing that. And so then when they try to, say, hire a person to take over to do that part of the making, there ends up being a kind of unexpected cost change. So I think to try to wrap all that up, I think it comes down to, like, you as a company deciding what is the best value in doing this yourself, or is it something else? Is your innovation and creativity actually something else, and therefore you should just be comfortable building relationships with manufacturers?
Hi, Andrew. I think your slides had a lot of important information in them. So I think a couple of people in the call really wanted to maybe have access to those slides. So do you think you could put them in the chat?
Yeah, definitely. So I think I'm not sure 100% sure the best way to do that. If I can, I know this is being recorded and the recording will be shared. I don't know, and I'm happy to share, like, we're intentionally giving away all this information. So I'm happy to share the slides. I'm just not sure the best strategy to do that.
Yeah, Andrew, if you'd like for folks to reach out to you directly, and if you want to share your email, or yeah, we will be posting this on YouTube maybe in a week or week and a half or so. So yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I just entered my email in the chat box. So so if you want it right away, feel free to email me and I can share it as a PDF. And then I think that as things get posted online, that will be made more accessible. And Yeah, so unfortunately, I'm working with DVIRC, and this will be posted also on their website. But unfortunately, it's not live yet, so I can't do that.
Hi again. When we contact you for help, for manufacturing help, how does that go? What should we bring to you to say this is what we're looking for? And you kind of take it from there. What's the process?
So whatever stage you're at is totally fine. And so basically what we've compiled is more or less an interview. So I chat with you, I learn about your product, I learn about what type of manufacturing requirements you might need. And then from there, we create what's called a manufacturing profile. And so it helps kind of like together, it's in a way we kind of go through that list of defining the scale of the product, the kind of quantity you might be looking for, what type of materials or manufacturing processes you might be looking for as well. And then if you have drawings too, we kind of package all this information and we use that to then kind of try to find potential connections in the regional ecosystem, manufacturing ecosystem. So wherever you're at, I'll work with you and talk to you about what type of connections you're looking for.
Is there a fee?
Nope.
To work with you? No. Oh.
So this is part of a bigger kind of a strategy and something that we're finding is, it's like, in some ways this is experimental. We're still trying to work out the right way of doing this and the right process. But ultimately we're finding, again, there's like lots of information. There's lots of benefits to just kind of making the introductions and the connections. So right now it's just kind of a service we're providing to anybody who's looking for help.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to, can you hear me okay? This is Bruce.
Yep.
Hi, thanks. This has been interesting and useful, I believe. Very useful. But in addition to, say, manufacturing parts, is there, I presume there are other companies that do assembly and things along that nature for manufacturing?
Yep.
As well as handling the logistics of receiving and distributing.
Yep. So there's different. So some companies actually specialize in multiple steps in the manufacturing process, which can include, for example, working with other vendors. So if you have a product that consists of multiple parts, you could actually find one company that will actually take in parts from other manufacturers, assemble them to the part they're making, and then go from there. So part of the supply chain can either include a separate company that does solely assembly, or again, you can find some manufacturers that will take that on for you. So again, like there's some benefits to trying to find companies that will do multiple stages of manufacturing. And then there might be some downfalls. And again, that's the kind of question that came up earlier. As a startup, you might actually find that assembly is the thing that you really have to do yourself because maybe your product is a little complex and requires a little bit more sort of specialized assembly. And so we do find that possibility, that strategy as well, that they build a network of companies that make parts and then they do assembly, kind of what we would call in-house. Also, the same is true with packaging. There are some companies that will take in all your parts, take in your packaging, and do all of it for you, and then offers warehousing services as well. And so ultimately, there are people that we call kind of experts in logistics, which typically means the assembly, the packaging, the warehouse, and the distribution. That can fall outside of the quote unquote sort of manufacturing of the parts and pieces. And that's part of what we're trying to help make relationships to as well. So even if you have, if you're struggling just with assembly or just with packaging, there are those parts of the manufacturing supply chain in the region as well, and we can help try to make connections there too. So last thing I want to share too is ultimately I realized, again, I went through a lot of information in a very short amount of time. And the world of, and this was very, I would say, high level kind of description of manufacturing. And even if these kind of higher level concepts and understandings make sense to you, then it does actually make the kind of next more specific steps related to your individual projects a little bit more easier to navigate. And again, I think one of the things that's inspiring and interesting is, as I think I said this earlier too, we find more and more there's no one path for entrepreneurs. And so we find people that have a really deep sort of knowledge of certain scientific processes and see ways of kind of translating that into products. And so part of what we're hoping to do, again, is find better ways of kind of matching expertise and finding ways of building those connections, relationships. So there might even be opportunities where, depending on the people we interview, we'll actually make connections across entrepreneurs that might be working on similar products and or having similar barriers to development.
Sounds great. Is there any recommended path that you suggest for going further in depth into learning about manufacturing and options, and certainly? So
I would say it might depend on the specific kind of technologies or things you're interested in. So one, if you want to contact me, I can help connect you to some other specifically sort of education-based resources online. A lot of those platforms like Xometry, for example, they're providing more and more educational materials. And so they've created design guides, which kind of break down, like, let's say, for example, you want to make something using sheet metal. There's a breakdown of like, what is sheet metal? What are the rules and regulations kind of that lead to like successful parts and pieces? Same with injection molding. And so there's a little bit of, you can kind of piece together a lot of knowledge around specific things. DVIRC and myself are talking about more in-depth workshops, like a design for manufacturing workshop. I know NextFab is also interested in that as well. So if there are some of you that have an interest in doing a kind of more in-depth dive, maybe with your specific product idea, let me know that as well, and we'll keep you up to date on that and try to offer more project-specific workshops to help you get where you want to go. All right. So thank you again. I appreciate all the time, like Venture Cafe. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with everybody and share some insights. And again, I realize like the world of manufacturing is vast, and even if this just starts to kind of scratch the surface and develop some clarity, then I think we're starting to kind of do the right things. So so again, don't hesitate to send me an email. I'm happy to meet you, learn more about your projects, and help make connections as wherever I possibly can. And again, I think hopefully this will be posted live, and you'll be able to kind of come back and learn more about that. And again, feel free to email me and I'll get you the slide deck pretty quickly.
Thanks everyone for showing up, and
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
And thank you, Andrew, for a great presentation.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
See you all next time.